Hi friends, this is Angelica. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have a really fun video for you. I'm going to be sharing how I put together 2 Halloween cards using new dies from Sizzix. Scrapbook.com sent me 4 sets from the Tim Holtz line, and I'm going to be using these first 3 sets in this video, and then this is the 4th set that I put aside for a future project. The first thing that I wanted to do was actually use these dies to die cut white cardstock so I can see what the die cuts look like. So I am using Neenah 80-pound solar white cardstock. That's what I'm going to be die cutting from. And I have stack and sort trays set up so each die set will have its own tray so I can keep the pieces kind of separated from each package. Once I was able to size the die cuts, I decided I wanted to make 2 evening skies for the cards. So the first thing I'm going to do is pick circles for the moon that's going to be on each card front. I pulled 2 circles from the shape die circle set, and I'm going to use those dies to die cut masking paper. So this first panel, I've put the moon mask in the center of the panel, and now I'm going to make an evening green sky around the moon. I started with Twisted Citron Distress Oxide ink and then moved on to cracked pistachio and pine needles. The pine needles wasn't dark enough for me, so I did bring in some black soot to darken up the edges, and then I'm just going to go back and reblend everything so it's nice and even. Once the blending was done, I took the mask off, and now I'm going to add some color to the moon. It's this beautiful bright white circle, but we need to just break that white up a little bit. I'm going to use pumice stone Distress Oxide ink and some water to break up that white. I'm using a watercolor brush. You can use a water brush if you don't have a watercolor brush. I'm just going to dab this ink all over the moon in just random places until I'm happy with how the moon looks. Now the moon is done. I'm going to put the mask back on, and we're going to splatter the Skyline with white ink. This is scrapbook.com's Lustre pen in white, and I did this at the end because I didn't want to smear any of that white ink while I was doing the watercoloring on the moon. So I'm going to set that aside to dry. I'm going to just jump into the second panel. I'm doing the same exact steps, just this time I'm using purple Distress Oxide inks. Now it's time to move on to the die cuts, and I'm going to use all of the white die cuts. I decided to just use Distress Oxide inks to ink up the paper since everything is going to be black. So I have the black Soot Distress Oxide out, and I'm using a sponge dauber to add the ink to the die cuts, and I am working on a silicone mat to keep my work surface protected. Now, since I'm working with Distress Oxide ink, it does take a little while for the ink to fully dry. So while the paper is still wet with the ink, I brushed the die cuts with Perfect Pearl iridescent pigment powder. And this color, I believe, is Perfect Pearl. I've had this in my stash for years. I love putting this over the Distress Oxide inks. It just really enhances the die cuts, especially these black die cuts. It just gave them a beautiful sheen to them. I also wanted to give the die cuts a glow from the moon, but I'm not a big fan of using white gel pens on my projects. They just get really uncomfortable trying to put lines in the right places. So I went back and I just die cut more white paper, and I'm going to glue the inked die cuts onto the white die cuts and just shift them over slightly so the white peeks out, and then that's going to be the glow from the moon. Now I'm ready to get the first card front put together. So I'm doing a quick layout with the die cuts just to kind of get an idea of what I am like. I love the way that this scene looks like. I just want to have a ground for the witch to be walking on. So I'm going to just use my scissors and cut a hilly ground for her to be walking on. I'm going to quickly ink that with the black soot. I'll brush the pigment powder over it, and then I'm going to glue the piece onto the panel. But before I glue the piece onto the panel, I am going to die cut the panel first, and I'm using the nested rectangles die set. I'm using the second largest rectangle in this die set to clean up the edges and just get that panel the perfect size for an A2 size card base. And now I'm going to add that ground that she's going to be walking on. I used 1mm foam strips to attach the witch onto the card front, and I'm also going to use that same size foam to attach the broom. I'm just going to put it on the bottom of the broom, and the handle I will actually glue onto her hand. So I'm just going to put the smallest amount of glue here, and I'm going to use my tweezers to hold the broom and hand in place so they glue together. I also used glue to attach the branches, the bird, and the bats to the card panel, and all the pieces that are hanging off the edge. I just used my scissors to snip those branches off. For the sentiment, I pulled out scrapbook.com's Trick or Treat stamp set, and I'm going to heat emboss the Happy Halloween sentiment onto black cardstock, and then I used my mini snips to cut the sentiment down into 2 small strips, and I will attach the strips to the card with 1mm foam strips. Now let's move on to the purple card. I've already glued the graveyard die cut to the night sky, and I made another hilly ground to put in front of the graveyard, and I have a strip of 1mm foam adhesive already on the panel. I'm just going to put this hill right on top of that foam, and I'm using this hill to kind of cover up how small the graveyard is, because it isn't the full length of my panel, so I use the hill to kind of hide that. And I'm quickly showing right now the die sets that I used, or what dies from each die set I'm using for this card. There aren't names on these die sets, so there's only numbers. I will link the dies down below to scrapbook.com, and then you can go over there if you'd like to take a closer look at these die sets. Meanwhile, I am inking the word boo to use as my sentiment. Once I was done inking, I did do another layer of the pigment powder over the top, and now I'm going to glue that word to a white background. And I used 1mm foam strips to add the word and the ghost to the panel. The last thing that I have to do to finish this panel is just add a little bit of glue to the back of the spider. I'm going to have that spider hanging from the last O, and that's going to finish this panel. So I'm having a hard time choosing which one's my favorite, the purple or the green. I just love them both. It's been so long since I've done an evening sky like this, and I'm so glad I pulled these colors out. I had a lot of fun also working with these dies. Halloween is not a genre that I make a lot of cards for, so this was a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I had so much fun. These cards turned out so fantastic. I will have all the products linked down below if you want to go take a closer look at them. I'll link them to scrapbook.com, and I'll also put a link into my gallery over on their site where you can see all the projects that I've made, and I do have a supply list for each project. That is all that I have for today. I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me. Take care, friends.